PixMix is brought to you by the Arun and Show, broadcasting on Liberated Syndication, also on twitch.tv/Arun Show, and is in association with the Old School Lane broadcast.
PixMix is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com. Broadcast to you in Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, and many other places, and is in association with the Aaron Meta Show.
I need to get a better publisher. Welcome to PixMix. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And would you believe it? We're finally doing a PixMix after all this time. And, we're not randomly reviewing Pixar films anymore because we've done all of them up until now, until we spoke about this one. By the way, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all our listeners. And I know 2020 has been a very difficult year for all of us, but at least we got something very pleasant to all end it on.
Yes, indeed. And I hope that you guys have been enjoying our little advent calendar-like Pix Minis, where we were looking back on all of the Pixar shorts, all the way from The Adventures of Andre and Wally B to La Luna. So don't worry, we will be covering the other Pixar shorts, but we'll do that in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, but for the meantime, we are going to be doing at the very end of the year on New Year's Eve our top 5 best and top 5 worst Pixar shorts for the first 26. And before everybody says, well, we've not covered all of them yet, so how do you know that they're going to be the best and the worst? We are going to do more Pixar shorts very, very soon, and then after that, we'll obviously do another top 5 best and top 5 worst of those lot, and maybe we'll do some messing around with them to kind of like give a definitive list of what we think are the top 5 best and top 5 worst Pixar shorts of all time. But until then, we just want to let you guys know that the deadline has probably passed by now by the start of this episode, so the deadline for getting your ratings in for those Pixar shorts elapsed over midnight on basically on Boxing Day / Christmas Day on the 25th to the 26th. So thank you very much for everybody who has voted. There's not as very many as we had the last time, but we've got enough to kind of like maybe get something together and get some kind of idea of what you all think of. But anyway, that is until New Year's Eve. We are concentrating on Christmas Day, and so we have just watched this quite frankly phenomenal film. So Patricia, are you ready to get very soulful with this movie?
Yes, I am. I absolutely am.
Here we go. So Soul is the movie that came out on Disney Plus. It's a quote-unquote a Disney Plus original. It was originally supposed to be in movies, but it was delayed multiple times due to the Backstreet Boys reunion tour. But finally, it did make its release onto streaming, and there is going to be, I believe, there will be some dates that will be saying that Soul will be released in the near future. But for the meantime, instead of the big screen, we had to basically watch it on the small screen on my 4K television. So I guess it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I think even though it's on the small screen, this is a very, very big movie, and I don't think our small screens do it justice.
Absolutely not. I'm sure if we were in a situation in which Aaron and I saw Coco in theaters and we saw Soul in theaters, then, oh man, I'm sure it would have been just as spectacular.
Yeah. So, we'll just give you the basic story. So, we have a music teacher who is basically doing a high school band and is finally offered the job to actually do it, but that's not what he wants to do. Instead, he wants to go to the Half Note Club, where he gets the opportunity to be part of a quartet of other jazz musicians. When he goes in to do his audition, he does finally land the role and is very euphoric about it. But unfortunately, he makes a wrong step down a manhole cover and all the way down into the sewer and ends up in a very obscure world.
Yes, he ends up in an obscure world, which would lead up to the great beyond. For those who are wondering, in this version, he is sort of almost dead. So yeah, I mean, we knew about this for the longest time because it was shown so much in the trailers about how Joe Gardner, who is our main protagonist, basically turns into a soul trying to get himself back into Earth so that he can be able to participate in the gig of a lifetime. And then along the way, he meets up with a soul named 22 who absolutely does not want to go into Earth because she just finds it to be boring and she doesn't know of any interest of going into Earth. So basically, you have your usual shenanigans happen, except that of course in the trailer's not going to show you everything, but it does take a major twist in the second act, but you will get to that. But yeah, I mean, once again, we have the amazing work of Pete Docter, who gave us many of the Pixar classics, such as Monsters Inc., Up, Inside Out, and this one in particular. And a lot of people say that this is essentially a spiritual successor to Inside Out. Instead of focusing on emotions, we now experiencing souls.
And I guess there was a lot riding on this movie because for those of you who do know that aren't caught up with the politics of Pixar, obviously John Lasseter is out the door, and so I think, and also it's going to be now focused now on a new generation of Pixar artists, which are currently there at Pixar Studios doing the very original content. Now they're not doing sequels for the foreseeable future, at least that's what we know as of this podcast, and so obviously that we're getting more original works. We're going to get Soul in this incarnation. And then we're going to get a few more original movies outside of that as well. And so there was a lot riding on this movie to obviously see where Pixar is going to go, because obviously once you have a massive change in management like that, obviously all sorts of things can happen. Some things can be positive, some things can be negative, but overall it's whether they can actually still aspire to that Pixar feel and that Pixar note that we all know and love, for the last since Toy Story was released in the 1990s. And oh my goodness, does it nail it all. And not only that, this movie looks so beautiful in 4K. It really does. And so, I mean, should we go on the way that it looks first before we even get into like the meat and potatoes of this?
Oh yeah, sure. I think that yeah, it has such a large scale that we haven't seen since Coco. It is absolutely just gorgeous with its colors and its presentation. The cinematography is fantastic. The way that it showcases music and the life of New York City. And everything about it is just absolutely fantastic. I mean, I know, Aaron, you've been complaining about like, another movie taking place in New York City, bore. But no, here it actually works.
Yeah, this is actually the time where you actually, this actually works to the movie's advantage. Like that, that you're in New York City, and you can appreciate how large and how colorful and how how euphoric and how busy it all is and everything like that. It actually catches the emotion of the city, and not only that, like Pixar films sometimes have this. I think at least recently, I've not felt like there's been like we're in big areas since do you remember the scene in Monsters Inc. where there's like all the doors and like you're in just like this massive storage hold of like all these doors that go like all over the world and things like that. That was the last time I kind of felt like I was in like a huge environment in Pixar, in a Pixar movie. And this, oh my goodness, this just takes it and like makes it like 100 times bigger.
Yeah, well, for me, the last time that I felt such a big scale like that was when we saw Miguel going into the world of the dead in Coco. When you saw the scene in which like you see all the buildings and the colors and such. That was the last time I felt it, and that was a few years ago. I mean, since then, I mean, sure, we've had movies such as Toy Story 4 and Onward that were able to take advantage of the scale and the largeness of the world, but no, this is actually a beautiful take on not only New York City, but also with the great beyond and the great before and all of the other parts of the worlds around it.
Yeah, but I think the reason why I don't complain about New York City in this time is because I think we're actually dealing with like the indigenous people of New York City. These people are from New York. I mean, it's not like how we complain in other movies, like, oh hey, let's take these bunch of characters who I assume had never been to New York City before, but probably have been at some point, and let's just throw them in New York City and let's just see how they react to it. In this, it feels like the only person who is not indigenous to New York City is 22. When you think about it. So, I mean, like, you live like that outside experience through him, but with everybody, other characters in there, they live in this city. They know what this is about, and you can feel like, you can feel like the souls, going through that, so even in that case, even though you don't see them as actual souls, you can still feel like this is who this this city is a part of them. It's so I feel like that's a big plus that goes towards it, and I don't think we get to see that too much in other movies. But the way this looks, everything here feels like the city feels real. The people, even though they're like cartoon characters, they're far more detailed than model wise than I think any other Pixar film that I can recall. I think the only thing that comes a little bit closer probably is The Incredibles 2, maybe. But I mean,
Right.
in this case, wow, like the lighting is beautiful. When you're in the jazz club and you see the shining of the saxophone and you can see the light, bouncing off everything, and you also with the soundtrack that goes with it as well. This movie puts you in the mood. It
Yeah, it
really
does.
does. Yeah. So I just say to everybody, put this on, turn the lights off, and let the screen do its thing. You know.
Absolutely. And, a lot of the people who are working on this movie, I mean, obviously we got the usual contenders like Pete Docter, but, in addition to that, but we also have some new people coming in, such as Mike Jones and Ken Powers, even though that Mike Jones has, featured in the animation world for quite a bit. He's worked in Columbia, he's worked in HBO, he's worked in Warner Brothers and Sony. But yeah, this is the first time that he's ever been a part of a Pixar movie, and now he's going to be doing Luca in the future. And then we have Ken Powers, who you may know as the screenwriter behind One Night in Miami and Star Trek Discovery. And then the shocking of all shocks to me is that the musicians of this movie are not the usual Randy Newman or Michael Gacciano. It's Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross from Nine Inch Nails.
But keep in mind, Trent Reznor did the soundtrack to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He is, and also he's done the soundtrack to Quake as well. So him coming out of his shell, if you will, is not an unusual thing.
I guess true. I mean, yeah, you're right. He has done Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and The Social Network and, various other movies. But, when you think of, Reznor and Atticus Ross, you think of rock music, but this is jazz, and they pulled it off very well. And of course, they're not the only musicians in Pixar. I mean, I don't want to say that they were hugely responsible for it, because I mean, of course they are. But also another person who sadly isn't as credited as both of them is John Batiste, who is also a jazz musician. So shout outs to him as well.
I'm just looking through the production class. I mean, am I right in saying music by no Randy Newman?
No Randy Newman, no Michael Gacciano. It's completely different now. I mean, yes, it's true. I mean, we had, different people working on Onward, but it just sounded, very typical, nothing out of the ordinary. And you have Brandy Carlisle doing the ending song. But here, it actually sounds pretty different. I mean, obviously it makes a lot of sense because it's jazz music, but it actually fits in really well while giving it that distinct Pixar feel.
Yeah, but I think the thing with, I mean, if we have to compare Soul to Onward, I think where Onward, I think, probably gets it wrong, unfortunately, and we can probably, I don't know how much of this is the movie's fault, really. I felt like Onward came in too late. Don't you feel like it did? Because you feel
I mean,
like
well, to be fair, it wasn't his fault,
yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of if this were released maybe during the time of when Adventure Time probably came out, when it was just when it was slightly new and when Steven Universe was getting a start. If Onward had came in at that time, I think we're probably looking a bit more at Onward. I think probably more favorably than we will be looking at now. It's because the whole fantasy thing has been done, and in regards to it being a parody of that, I think it didn't really work all that well, if you ask me. But I mean, in regards to Soul, I mean, Soul is I guess you could say is sort of the kind of you say is the spiritual sequel, I guess, of Inside Out. It kind of goes into areas where Inside Out couldn't get in because Inside Out was more about emotions. This is more about obviously, yeah, it's about your reactions of how you emote, but in this movie, this is about how you feel, and this is about how you feel inspired.
Exactly. It's about passion. It's about that spark that gets you out there in the world. If you don't have that spark, you're not able to come into Earth. And that's what 22 is missing. So I guess there's not really much we can say about the presentation and all the behind the scenes stuff. Let's just get into the story.
Yeah. So, obviously, we also get back to the manhole cover, and unfortunately, our protagonist has then been left into the other world, if you will. So, Joe then ends up escaping off after going into the great beyond, and ends up in like the great before. So he ends up with like all these new souls who are basically like kids who are just running around and just trying to like discover who which souls like who they're going to be and before they can get to Earth. So Joe then decides to disguise himself as a mentor to these souls and is assigned probably the worst soul that he could possibly be given, which is going to be Soul 22, who has basically gone through pretty much every single inspirational soul that you could potentially go through and has basically chewed them up and spit them out, pretty much.
Yeah. Everything that you can think of: baking, being an athlete, music. But soul is, soul number 22 is just not interested. Basically, 22 is saying, I don't like Earth. I think it's boring. I just want to stay here. And then you have everybody else saying, no, 22, that's not how it works. You have to be able to go down there and live life. But 22 is just not interested. And so, basically Joe gets, crazily into a situation where he is a mentor, where he's trying to like preventing himself to go over to the great beyond. And then they paired him up with 22 saying, your job is to help this soul go into Earth, find what the purpose of 22 is. And then, very similar to Wreck-It Ralph, you have a situation in which when he decides to make a deal with 22 saying, if we find your spark, I can take your badge and then I'll be able to make it myself back so that I can be able to go into my gig tonight. Because I felt like my life was just about to get started at the point in which I wasn't able to fulfill my dreams of being a musician. I've been a high school music teacher, and I've been alone, and I want to fulfill this passion that I've always had. And 22 was like, yeah, sure. So yeah, very Wreck-It Ralph-esque, in which Wreck-It Ralph meets up with Vanellope, and he's saying, if you can win first prize, and it can show that I'm not a bad guy, I'm a good guy. And then they decided to work together on that. So yeah, kind of similar.
I don't know. Like, I think Soul does it better than Wreck-It Ralph. I think, if you ask me, because keep in mind that's only one part of the movie. That little section that we started off. I mean, once we move further forward into it, I mean, obviously, we get to the point where we thought maybe this would have been like at the end of the film rather than kind of like in the second act. But Joe and 22 do eventually end up back on Earth, thanks to the efforts of a sort of a Weird Al kind of like looking mystic. I think that's the way I can describe him.
Moonwind, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Moonwind ends up bringing them back, but then the problem is that he mixed them both up. So Joe ends up in the body of a cat, and 22 ends up in Joe's body. So then we basically get this bit where it's kind of like, which, I guess you could say is a bit of a cliche in movies because, we've seen this since Freaky Friday. Pretty much it's like, oh, hey, they swap bodies, and now they got to figure out what they got to do. Or mind you, I guess you can say it's like kind of like the kind of like the body swap routine because obviously the cat wasn't like obviously the cat's ended up in the air, so the cat was still the cat. But obviously you get this sort of kind of like another spin on. Especially, tell you what, actually, would I dare say that's actually is a spin on that routine when you think about it?
I guess so. You know what this movie reminded me of the more I saw it? Down to Earth. You remember that movie with Chris Rock in which, he was a comedian and he was struggling so that he can be able to get himself out there. And just when he was about to get that one spark of making it over to the Apollo, he gets run over by a truck when he's riding his bike home. And so because he wasn't meant to die that quickly, the angels were like, okay, we need to put him into another body. And so they put him into the body of a white billionaire. And so while this white billionaire is reviled by everyone because he's a stingy, rich jerk off, and so he decides to, Chris Rock doing his usual Chris Rock shtick about like, yeah, I'm going to be able to, get myself back into the comedic route and, make myself back into the Apollo, even though that I have the body of a white man. And, then he starts helping people out. Like he gives money to the hospitals and various things, and he starts falling in love with a woman. So yeah, I mean, it kind of reminded me of that sort of, except that there's no love interest, and it's not about the guy, about a struggling comedian, it's about a struggling musician. So,
Well, they
I,
did. They did allude to a love interest in the movie in sorry, but in Soul, because I mean they were saying, oh, who's Lisa? And it's kind of like,
yeah.
oh, hey, we're gonna meet this woman, but nah. But I mean, I don't know if it was just cut for time or if it was just like just a throwaway gag. I'm not too sure, but like.
I like to think that maybe it's either that or maybe they were just opening it up to interpretation. And we'll get to the ending in just a moment, but there's a lot of things that aren't answered. I mean, there are some things such as Joe's backstory and where his true passion lies, but there's a lot of things that are not answered. And I think that's leaving to the audience to discuss about, what really happened here, and, why is 22 the way that it is, and how did Joe get the
Well,
spark
I can
other
I
than
can
just.
answer that for you, babe. It's because 22. I mean, here's the thing about it. Do you remember that? You know those that meme I always post about? Every time I complain about our education system, like saying like it's about a guy at a desk and like here's all these animals and it's a guy asking him all the animals to climb a tree. The monkey is smiling, but then like there's a goldfish, there's an elephant, there's like other animals that obviously can't climb a tree. You know what I'm saying? So, but the monkey is smiling because obviously he can get up and climb that tree, and then he says, "Oh, everyone's got to take the same test." It's 20. I actually sympathize because 22, I believe, is one of those animals who can't climb that tree. And basically needs, some assistance being able to, obviously get to the top of the tree. And so instead of being inspired by basically learning what he could potentially do in the academy, he actually lives the life of Joe, and then becomes inspired by basically doing that and obviously completing his circle.
Yeah, exactly. And you actually bring up a really good point. I didn't even think about it. That we're in a situation in which people learn the same educational system, but there's some people out there that can't learn it because it doesn't spark them the same way. People don't know how to do certain things because either they are not interested in it, or maybe it's presented in a way that doesn't interest them. So they need to be able to find unique ways. And 22 has been in the great before for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm sure that, it has been going through a lot of training. Like, do you want to be a carpenter? No. Do you want to be a sculptor? No. Do you want to be a baker? Do you want to be a farmer? And then in the 21st century, you have, do you want to be an athlete? Do you want to be a baker? Do you want to be a musician? And none of it interests it. So then we have this situation in which 22 finally gets into Earth and experiences it for the first time in its raw form, and it loves it, and it wants to be able to experience life the way it truly is. I mean, you can learn so much from doing things in a classroom or even online if you're like one of those people who learn from things by, practicing it on videos on YouTube or going to master class. But it's only until you actually get to experience it yourself head on that you can be able to truly see if you're really passionate about it.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing I'm getting at is that I mean, people learn in different ways, and you can't just say here's this one linear path that you think everyone's going to go down, everyone's going to respond to, because not everyone's going to respond to it. And 22 is that person.
Yeah,
So it's taken 22 to actually go down and actually experience life, to actually appreciate life. you know.
exactly.
So basically, we have them at moment, and obviously 22 runs away because obviously he doesn't want to go back now, and so that leads to a bit of conflict there. But obviously, we then run into I guess you could say our antagonist, but I mean, he's an interesting antagonist because he's not really motivated in order to like hurt our protagonist in this way. His motivation is to say that I'm the one who's in charge of the count, and the count is off. And so, Joe being out of the count is my motivation to get him back in there because he's not. That's not the way the things are supposed to be. And
Yeah,
so.
there's not. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's actually really interesting because there's not really an antagonist in this movie. I mean, some people will say, "Oh, I guess the closest antagonist would be Terry," but here's the thing: it's like he's just doing his job. He wants to make sure that everything is right with the world, and everything needs to be exactly the way it is. Oh, one soul out of billions of souls who come into the great beyond every single day. Oh, he needs to fix it, otherwise he'll go crazy. But yeah, I mean, like usually we have our
Well, actually, I actually want to pull up on that point because there actually hasn't been. I mean, he didn't, unless I'm mistaken. Like, did he actually explain what would happen if the count was actually off?
Exactly. I mean, he didn't say, "Oh, the whole world would go into chaos" or anything like that. No, I guess it really focused too much on him as like an antagonist, because we would see him like the first quarter of the movie, he's at the file cabinet looking through all the A's to Z's until he finally finds Joe Gardner's name all the way to G. And then he's like, I found this guy. I need to find him and I need to bring him back. So, I mean, there's no saying about, can you explain on what would happen if you don't bring him back? They actually never do.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be interesting because the only idea I could have in my head if to have an explanation of like, if the count is off, like something happens to the great beyond and like it explodes or something like that. But then obviously that would make the end of the movie not make all that much sense because obviously and by the way, spoilers by the way, if anyone's listening to this, and so if you want to if you want to stop listening right now and go watch the movie and then come back to us, then this is the time to do it. So here we go. So the end of the movie is a bit of a cop out. I'm going to be honest with you, because they, basically what happens is that, obviously 22 then goes down to Earth because obviously he's completed his cycle and then he gets to basically be, a life on Earth. But in order to do that, Joe has to give up his spark. Well, no, it wasn't his spark to begin with. Like, he took the spark off 22, but then he gave it back. So, 22 now is now heading for Earth, and Joe is now stuck in the Soul World, and now he's heading to the Great Beyond. For whatever reason, the Jerry's turn around and say, well, you've been quite inspiring to get 22 back to Earth, so as some reward, we're just going to let you go back to Earth anyway. Which is
that is
weird.
a bit of a cop out. I want to go back to Down to Earth again, in which in the end of that movie, when Chris Rock dies and he's put into the body of a billionaire. And so then they're like, well, this is what your body's gonna be. We can't put you back into your original body because you're dead. So spoilers for those who haven't seen the movie. So the billionaire dies of a heart attack. And so then Chris Rock was like, well, what's going to happen now? Well, we're going to have to put you in another body and you're going to have to live off this other person's life. And so he has to basically kind of start his life over again as a different comedian. But all the people that he's met up with along the way, they don't know who he is. And, they're saying, oh, I know who you are. You're Lance. And I'm saying, no, I'm Joe. So it would have been interesting if maybe we would have had a situation in which if Joe Gardner was to come back, but he would have come back in a different body, or maybe he would be accepting of death, which I don't know if they would have done that for Pixar, but I mean, I think it would have been interesting if we would have had
they killed Bing Bong. I mean, I wouldn't have been too surprised if they decided to say, Joe's going to go to the Brave Beyond. Actually, even better than that. I mean, imagine if they turned around and said, well, keep in mind, he thought his whole, life goal was obviously to be, this jazz singer in the quartet, and then he learns that he's basically going to be repeating this every night for the rest of his life. Pretty much, and when he learns about that, then he starts having a bit of a crisis about what is his life all about, and then obviously we get to the finale. So I mean, it would have been interesting if they turned around and said, if instead of going back to Earth, they would have said, you know what, you've done so well with this other soul. I mean, would you like to help all the other mentors and make the whole system work better, maybe? And they had it like that, and so he goes on to aspire other people, or maybe he does. If he does go back, I mean, there's no clear answer about what he actually does at the end of the movie. I guess you can kind of compare it to, the end of the Lorax. With the unless story arc, where it's kind of like the kid's given the seed. By the way, I'm talking about the old Lorax, not the new one, by the way. If he goes, he takes the seed, he goes off, and he wonders what kind of future he's going to create for himself. I guess you could say Soul kind of tries to do that with Joe, and so he kind of leaves the door open. So what's he going to do with his life now? I mean, I would have thought he would have been oh yeah, I will take the job over at the school and have a permanent job. Obviously inspiring other young people to obviously be better at their music and things like that. But so they don't really end it at that. He just kind of goes through he just goes out of his front door and that's the end of the movie.
Yeah. happened to 22 either. I mean, obviously, 22 would have been born as a baby, but we don't know what 22's life would have been outside of going over to the great before. What did 22 grow up to be? Did
You
it
know
grow up
what?
to
That's
be
really interesting because when you're with him, the latest Terminator movie, like they even show you like it all kind of comes full circle, doesn't it? Like they show you like who the female Terminator is going to be like in later life, when in that, and they're like somewhere down like all these types of movies, like they always seem to like show like oh, it's all good at the end, like there's the person there and like he's doing this, that, and the other. No, we don't see what happens to 22 after he's gone or she's
Yeah, I
gone.
mean, we don't. Yeah, exactly. We don't know if 22 becomes a boy or a girl. We don't know what 22 will grow up to be. We don't know anything. And you know what? That's interesting. Going back to what I was saying before, it leaves it up to your interpretation about, what would happen to Joe afterwards. Does he become a full-time teacher? Does he continue to be around with Dorothy Williams's group? We don't know. And what about 22? I mean, what about any of the other characters? I mean, that actually is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
And I'm
I mean,
I'm
I love how like when they're going through all the flashbacks of Joe's life, like he's done more than just basically be a jazz musician. Like he's shown with his mother, like on the beach, and he's shown like other aspects of his life. Him riding a bicycle and just doing other things in life, which just isn't like what he's been doing because his whole life has been wrapped around just playing the piano. That it is, and then when they start showing that, oh wait a second, his life has been more than just that. It's been about his family. It's been about his experiences. It's been about all the stuff that he does. This is one of the great things I love about this movie, and whether I'm starting to kind of debate how great this movie is because this movie does broaden your mind about everything that you expect in life. It's just it's asking you questions about things that you would normally take for granted. Like for example, I go to my local burger place down the road, and I have do like various other things in life, which are outside this podcast and outside my job, and so I mean it's answering questions about, oh hey, what else do I do? Like, well, how else do I experience life, and how else do I kind of like live my life? So this goes the extra mile to even walk you out the door to say, you know what, maybe you want to ask yourself some questions about all the stuff you do, like within the cracks of like what is your the main parts of your existence. You know, it's
and for all the people who say, "Oh, I'm passionate about this thing and it's been that way my whole life." It's like I'm sure that of course you would be, but I'm sure that there's more to life than just that one thing. And it's very similar to how Joe felt. It's like, no, music's always been like my life. But then he sees all of his other stuff in his life. Like him spending time with his father and his mother, and that one scene in the beach where he's with Lisa, and him at the diner eating a nice pecan pie, and being able to experience everything in his life. And then he just realizes there's more to life than just this one passion. There's everything that the world has to offer, even just the simple things like being able to enjoy. I mean, like what 22 did earlier when it first came into Earth, in which it experienced food for the first time, because in the great before, you can't touch, you can't smell, you can't taste, you can't do anything. So that again gives you to the notion that just because you're learning something doesn't mean you're fully experiencing it. And 22 is experiencing food. 22 is experiencing touching things. 22 is experiencing interacting with people. And so that would be enough for people. And just like living basic life is enough for people, while living a more complex dense life would be enough for people. So it actually brings you to the question about, like, the stuff that you really love doing, is it all that your life is about? I'm sure that there's more to it than that.
mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I mean also there's the music as well. I mean, I can't believe we're leaving this to the very last thing, but the music. Oh my goodness, this is a gorgeous movie to listen to. It really
Hmm.
is, and I'm actually looking forward. I actually want to check is the soundtrack actually on Spotify or like on is it released at the moment? Because
I'm not sure at the moment, but yeah, but the music is really, really well done. I mean, you can definitely feel the influence of past jazz musicians such as Louis Armstrong or Herbie Hancock or Ella Fitzgerald and various others. I mean, you can definitely feel that there was a strong influence in all of it. And the fact that they were able to to bring in such culture of introducing jazz to a young audience. It kind of reminds me of how we were first introduced to Hey Arnold when we were kids, introducing that jazz over to a young audience who wouldn't be introduced to that. I would hope that maybe jazz would be bringing into an audience for, especially for a younger audience who had never experienced it before.
Oh yeah, by the way, I'm actually just looking on Spotify now. Actually, Soul is the at least the French version of the soundtrack is apparently is on the Spotify right now. So
Okay, that's cool.
cool, and it's even got Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross credited as that. Imagine like Nine Inch Nails fans that are going to be soon going to be logging into Spotify, and people are going to be listening to the Soul soundtrack, and they're going to be looking at like the top like tracks for like these guys, and it's like, why is jazz at top of these guys on Spotify? That's
Yeah, I know,
that's
right?
going to be incredible. That's going to be hilarious, man. But
What a very interesting way to put in your filmography.
yeah.
Or your sound. Oh, what was it, like your musicography?
Yeah, your discology. I think
Discology. That's what I
yeah.
meant to say.
So,
Yeah.
and I think so. Yeah, I mean, it looks great. The narrative is brilliant. The music is brilliant. I mean, like, I got to be honest with you. Like, I know we always go through Pixar movies. We say that they're brilliant, and we obviously give them a score out of 10 out of 10. But I mean, I seriously, guys, you have to watch this movie. It's
Yeah.
you walk away from it, having a whole new aspect on how you live your life, and how you basically, and a whole new perspective on things. It's opened my mind more. Dare I say, it's probably opened my mind more than Inside Out has. It really has.
Really?
Yeah, I'm debating right now. Is this movie better than Inside Out? And Inside Out is like one of my favorite movies.
That's really hard to say, especially since Soul just literally came out today as of the recording of this podcast. So I think we really, really need to sit down and take a look into both of them to see how it would rank. Kind of like similar to how last year we talked about Toy Story 4 and like, how does it pair up with the other movies? We need to sit down for a few years and think about it. So yeah, I think it's just as good as Inside Out in my opinion.
You know what, sweetheart? I think that's a PixMix episode. Soul versus Inside Out. I think we should do it.
Okay, well, there you go. That's something to come in for the future.
Yeah, definitely. So, 2021 has a lot of possibilities, and that's just one of them. So,
Yeah. So I have to say that we've watched a lot of animated movies this year. We saw Trolls World Tour. We saw, let's see, what else did we see? I saw Scoob, and I haven't seen Candace Against the Universe.
They're all outside of PixMix anyway, so I mean, like...
Well, we saw Onward. Okay, well, we saw Onward.
We saw Onward, and so obviously that was average, I think we could say, but it was a little bit, that did give us a bit of pause for thought and a little bit of cause for concern, really, because obviously it's, we didn't really get as invested, I think, as, you say, Coco, or say Inside Out, or say, even Soul. So that gave us a bit of pause for thought and a bit of cause for concern about the direction of Pixar. But no, I think Pixar for the foreseeable future is in good hands if they continue doing things like Soul. I think.
Well, I'm still kind of concerned for it myself because it's Pete Docter. I mean, of course he's going to deliver some amazing stuff. And that gives me a major concern because even though that Pete Docter is currently the president of Pixar and he's still working on all the movies, that's great. But that gives me a concern about the younger generation because as we mentioned in the Onward episode, Dan Scallion was, doing this and Monsters University. And so I fear that the younger generation really needs to step up and prove to themselves that they don't need the likes of John Lasseter and Pete Docter and all of the other Disney and Pixar alum to kind of showcase that, okay, we're still the ones on top. And the younger ones, it's like, oh, but, even though it wasn't as good, but we still have the veterans. It's like, the veterans need to step up. Otherwise, it'll be very similar to what happened in Disney during the 70s.
You know what they need to do? They need to kind of reach outside the boundaries a little bit. Because, Brad Bird, when he came in and did The Incredibles, and when he came into, also stepped in to do Ratatouille, which, was going through production hell at the time. He came in and breathed a breath of fresh air into Pixar, and I think they need more people that basically do that. Like, I mean, obviously, I know you and I have debated, like, what happened if Miyazaki walked in and decided to do a Pixar film, and obviously it'd be kind of like, well, we'd have to wait for him to stop drawing the storyboards first before he can even get to like scripting, and so I accept that criticism of him. But what if they actually did that? What if they actually kind of like brought in outside people, like who aren't kind of like of course he's going to be going into the Disney fold, like Craig Bartlett, for example. Like, and I know I vouch for Craig because obviously Hey Arnold anniversary show every year, but I would really love to see Craig Bartlett do a Pixar film. I think he'd be brilliant at doing one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of other people out there that can be able to strut their stuff and say, hey, I can bring this, stuff in. Henry Selick, wouldn't it be amazing if Henry Selick would go into a Pixar movie? I mean, sure, we know, he did Disney with James and the Giant Peach and Nightmare Before Christmas, but he did Leica movies such as Coraline. I mean, imagine if, he would do a Pixar film. That would be incredibly unique.
Even better, has Tim Burton done a Pixar film yet?
No.
He should be on the list. So, we could draw up an entire list of people who should walk in with ideas and, come in and basically do a Pixar film. And I guarantee you, I think the amount of people that they could get in and they could, I think Pixar will be fine after that. I think, yeah. Unless Tim Burton walks in and says, well, I really want to do a spooky version of Santa Claus versus the, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. I think, I don't know. I think I'd probably have to say, yeah, you'd have to put a dampener on that. But, I think, there's plenty of people out there with very inspiring and outside ideas and who are veterans in this game. And if they brought these guys in, like, oh my God, I just thought of another one. And it'd be a pretty big one too. Don Bluth.
Oh, that would be so amazing. Don Bluth. I can imagine. I mean, here's the thing. Don Bluth has never done a 3D animated film before.
Yeah,
so that would be really different.
He could walk in, pitch ideas, and, Pixar can do the rest. He's
still been pitching that Dragon's Lair movie. So hey, I know that Pixar doesn't do pre-existing properties, but still, while Don Bluth is still around, bring him in.
I think if you walked in with Dragon's Lair, I think he probably wouldn't last very long. I think they'd be turning around and saying, "Well, can we do something a bit more original?"
Exactly.
Can we go Dirk Steve or something I don't think it would go very far, but yeah, it's they just need to open up, and I think they just need to let guys come in and just have a go at doing stuff.
Sure.
And on top of that as well, like anything that they learn from their craft, which is gold, will rub off on all the younger generation of Pixar, development there, and then they'll get wiser and learn more as a result. It'd be a good learning experience for everybody.
Oh, yeah, sure. And the same thing for the musicians as well. No, don't get me wrong. I still love Randy Newman and Thomas Newman and Michael Giacchino. But, as we've seen already with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, hey, bring in new musicians and be able to expand what you already have. So, mix it up,
Mm-hmm. So, that was Soul, and that was pretty much our take on what we think Pixar should be doing in the future. So,
right before we go, we need to rank this movie.
Yeah, so, it's a 10. No doubt about that.
Yeah, it's a 10.
Yeah, I think go see it. It will blow your mind. It really will. It's up there with Inside Out. Well, whether it's better than Inside Out, I think is going to be a podcast for another time, but I guarantee you guys, I think you will not regret watching this movie.
No, it's absolutely phenomenal. Hands down, from what I've seen, the best animated movie of 2020. Everything else has just been so incredibly mediocre and just an outright disappointment. But this movie is definitely going to give you that spark saying, you know what? At least we got this movie. So I'm able to, end the year off in a high note.
Mm-hmm. Okay, everybody. Well, until the next one, we will say take care and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Take care and bye for now.
See you later.